And let's talk about the NHL. It's been 2 episodes since we've really mentioned it, and NHL free agency has been a little crazy, to say the least. John Tavares was a guy who was on the market who the Islanders really weren't sure what he was going to do, but he kind of made it known that he wanted out and he wanted to play for his hometown Maple Leafs, which he did end up signing, and I can't tell you as a Maple Leafs fan, I could not be happier. He signed a 7-year, $77 million deal, and Vegas now has the Maple Leafs as the favorites to win the Stanley Cup in 2019. Cale, I want to go ahead and get your thoughts on this because I know we were talking about it before we came on today. You don't really think the Maple Leafs are in contention. I would go ahead and let us know why.
Is it going to happen? Yeah, the Tavares, John Tavares is an amazing player. He proved that with the Islanders. He's a scorer. He's a decent center. He wins like almost 80% of his faceoffs. You can't knock him for that. I'm glad he finally got paid. He deserves it, and he's at home too, so that helps a lot. And there have already been videos of the Tavares burning jerseys all over Twitter, so I love those. But
it's kind of like the LeBron of the NHL.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. But the reason why I don't think they're going to be in the Stanley Cup or in for Stanley Cup contention is basically due to Frederik Andersen, their goaltender. 6'4", 230. He's a big body, big frame, and he was actually huge for a goaltender. You don't see very many 6'4" goaltenders.
Oh, no.
But I just don't feel like behind Frederik Andersen that they can be a Stanley Cup winning team. Unless Frederik Andersen this offseason can turn it around, which I don't see happening at any point in time, I just don't feel like they're going to beat, guys in their conference. That's just 100% biased. I want to see him prove me wrong because I'm a big Tavares fan. I always have been. But we got to remember that in their division, we got Tampa Bay and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh should have won back-to-back, but they got knocked out by the Caps, they got knocked out by the Stanley Cup winning team. So they got knocked out by the best team. But Tampa Bay always putting together these solid runs. They put together a decent run against the Caps in the playoffs this year. Or in the fact, too, that they also have Philadelphia, the 76ers, or the Flyers, excuse me, all this NBA talk. The Flyers, they made it to the playoffs this year. So they got a tough division that they're going to have to get out of that I just don't see it happening.
Well, they were 49, 26, and 7. That's a pretty good season, and they were still third in the Atlantic Division this year. The Maple Leafs were. Mm-hmm. That's a good record, and they're going up against some good teams in that conference.
We forgot about Boston as well.
Right.
Which is who we knocked us out in the first round, Game 7. The Bruins took us out.
Now, I'm not going to say they're not Stanley Cup contenders, but I don't think Tavares makes that big of a change from where they were last year. Still made the playoffs, got knocked out in the first round. That's not an awful season. But I don't think he elevates him quite that high. The interesting thing I found on Tavares, he was -5 last year in his plus-minus, meaning that when he was on the ice, the team was outscored by 5 goals, generally. So he played for a bad team. The Islanders were 35, 37, and 10. He's played with them for 9 years. They didn't qualify for the playoffs for 6 times. In his career, his plus-minus was -12 so far with the Islanders. That's not good. The elite players that you see, Sidney Crosby, Austin Matthews, guys like that, they're +12, +20, +4. But you got to be in the positive. So I found that pretty interesting that he's been negative for his whole career. Now, like I said, he does play for a bad team. They didn't qualify 6 times out of the 9 years he was there. They lost in the first round, they lost in the second round, and they lost in the conference finals once. So he hasn't really had a good run of it, not really a whole lot around him to help him out with that plus-minus. But he had 84 points last year. That's a good season. It's nothing outstanding. It's nothing average. It's a good season. But I don't think he is that big of an elevation to make them contenders for the Stanley Cup.
Well, I want to say this. I know that I jokingly compared him to LeBron James of the NHL, but this situation really reminds me of the first stint LeBron had in Cleveland as Tavares did with the Islanders.
Right.
Okay, LeBron didn't have that much success. He made it to the finals one time, made it to the conference finals a couple times, but ended up getting knocked out by better teams even if he had the better seed. Okay, Tavares is a guy that's been to the playoffs. He's had success. He's made it to the conference finals, so we know that he's capable of doing so and putting a team on his back. Now that you pair him up with a guy like Austin Matthews, this could be one of the best 1-2 punches in the NHL. And I think that's why Vegas has them so high as a Stanley Cup, not only a contender, but have them as the favorites to win it. I mean, Austin Matthews, this is a guy, I don't want to say he's slept on, but I do think that he doesn't get as much notoriety as he should, being the best player on the Leafs.
He doesn't get as much notoriety because he's in Toronto.
Yeah,
Right.
all the way up there in Canada, eh?
Yeah, and being in Toronto, who has been a crap organization for the last couple of years, other than they've made a couple playoff runs, but they haven't got out of the second round.
Right. I tell you what, and being a fan, it's been hard to watch. It's been hard to hear the stories, and I haven't even been paying attention up until the last couple of years because it's been that painful. But now that we have someone that's been a 5-time All-Star, that's been to the playoffs, that has that experience, that we can pair with Matthews on the opposite side of the ice, I mean, this is just it's an exciting time to be a Leafs fan. I'm telling you.
It should be a decent season, but I don't see him in the Stanley Cup Finals. Not unless they get rid of Anderson. Anderson, like I said, I don't want to knock him too hard because he is a halfway average goaltender, but you can't not win a Stanley Cup with an average goaltender.
And, no, I tell you what, that's a fair criticism, and I know that we talked about this also before the show. As long as we can outscore the opponents, if Anderson wants to give up 5 goals and we score 6, we still win the game.
Yep, I mean, that's just all comes down to numbers. There's a lot of validity to that, but at the same time, he's got to be able to stop Marc-Andre Fleury on the other end. He's got to be able to stop Jonathan Quick and the LA Kings. He's got to be able to stop Holtby now with the Capitals. You know, it's going to be a tough ride for the Leafs coming out of that Atlantic division. I just don't see it happening.
All right, and you know what? That's a fair criticism. You know, we'll have to see what they're able to do, and you know what? As a fan, I hope they prove them wrong because I would like to see them hoist up that cup. It's been a very long time.
I'm not disagreeing that.
67 they won.
That was the last time they won. Yep.
But moving on here, we have another interesting signing. We have the Las Vegas Golden Knights signed center Paul Stastny to a 3-year, $19.5 million deal. And I mean, this was a head scratcher for me because the Winnipeg Jets had a pretty good series with them. They went 6 games. You know, I don't know why they wouldn't retain this guy and try to re-sign him, or maybe they tried and he just said, "No, I'm going to go to Vegas." But I find it hard to go to the team that beat you to get to the finals.
I'm going to throw in one thing. In 2015, everybody wanted to come to the Chicago Cubs. The Vegas is where they're at right now. Everybody wants to go play for Vegas because Vegas is hot, they're young, they're fast, they're quick. So Paul Stastny wanting to go over to Vegas from Winnipeg, who beat them, is not a bad idea. You got to remember, the guys in the NHL are not like the NBA. They're not here to chase rings. They're here to play the game of hockey with who they feel like they can win with. Vegas has that rough and tough young group that wants to win, and they have the drive because they've been criticized all year saying they're not going to be nothing. So with adding Stastny to the Golden Knights, another center that can win faceoffs, and he has proven that all season long in Winnipeg. It's a good pickup for Vegas. How will it affect Winnipeg? Don't know. Winnipeg still got a lot of decent players. They still got Hollebuck out of Dearborn, Michigan, front their goaltender they can put on their back and just ride him all the way to the Stanley Cup. But and Bufflin too. Dustin Bufflin's been in the league forever, really well respected. That Winnipeg isn't going to be that, or isn't going to have that big of a loss with losing Paul Stastny. I mean, he's just an average player. He does bring energy and he brings fire to the ice, into that bench over there. But I just feel like he's not gonna, or the Winnipeg isn't gonna, feel that loss of losing him that much.
Well, and he's a guy, like you said, wins his face-offs, and that's very important. You got to have the puck to be able to throw it in the back of that net. Now, he doesn't show up on the stat sheet a lot throughout the rest of the stats, but face-offs are very important, and I think Vegas realized that, and they went out and paid this guy to come do that because they had a little issue with that this year. Couldn't win a whole lot of them.
Vegas doesn't have a true center that can win faceoffs, but now they do, and that's what they were looking for, and that's what they signed, and they went out and got it.
Real quick, though, do you think that this is a problem because Vegas has already lost a handful of guys to other teams because of the success that they had, so those guys got paid? Because like you said, with an expansion team, you have that expansion draft, and then it's all the players that teams didn't want, right, or didn't feel like they needed to, put the hold on,
correct,
and keep them. So now that they had that success and they're going to other teams, they're getting paid. Does this kind of deplete the roster of Vegas, and do you see them having the same success that they did this year?
No, the Golden Knights, or I do see them having the success. It does not deplete them as a team. They had to get rid of some people due to the salary cap, obviously, because they made it to the Stanley Cup, so their salary cap shrinks. Does it deplete them as a team? Absolutely not, because they've got that young core that it's just solid. I mean, I don't have anything else to say other than they're solid. It's not going to affect them that much. They did get a good center. They've got proven scorers that are young on that team.
They lost a couple guys, but I don't think is anything big enough for them to worry about. I don't know if they'll have Stanley Cup success again this year, but I see them making it to the playoffs easily.
I do see a Western Conference Final team.
I was about to say they still are top 4 in favorite Vegas odds to win the cup.
Right.
So
yeah, they still have very good chances. Like I said, I don't know if it's Stanley Cup chances, but they've definitely got a good team in the Western Conference. There's no doubt about that.
And that was after this signing. Real quick though, how do you I know you touched on it a little bit, but Tyson, I want to get your take on it real quick. How do you expect the Jets to bounce back from this loss? Is it that big of a loss for Winnipeg?
Like I said, he didn't show up too big on the stats. I think in the 19 games he had with the Jets before the playoffs, he had 4 goals, 9 assists, so that's 13 points. Now, in that time, he was +6 in those few games that he had with the Jets in the regular season. Before that, with St. Louis, he was -5 in the other 63 games in the front half of the season.
Not good.
Yeah, once again, not good. But he very much turned it around. He ended up playing phenomenally with the Jets, winning his face-offs and getting points when he needed to get them, and he played great throughout the playoffs. So I don't think it's a huge loss. I think he's a good player with better qualities, but I think he can be replaced.
A lot of people said, real quick, just one more thing before we move on to the next signing. A lot of people said that the Jets overachieved this year and making it to the conference finals. I think a lot of people are on board with that statement. Is this something with this loss that they can do again? Can they make it to the conference finals?
Absolutely. They've only lost 2 guys, being Stanzi and I can't remember the other guy.
I can't remember.
They've only lost 2 out of that team. They still got a solid coach. They've still got a solid goaltender. And the Winnipeg whiteout up there. I don't know if you guys got to see any of those Jets games, but man, when they're at home, it is loud and it is insane in that ice or that rink.
Which, oddly enough, they struggle winning at home.
They had in the Stanley Cup Finals. They had better record on the road than they did at home, which that doesn't make sense. But some teams are just better on the road.
Absolutely. Some just kind of maybe the pressure of having to perform in front of fans that are so passionate and just want to see their team.
Packed house.
Yeah, they want to see their team succeed so badly. But getting on to the next signing here, the Washington Capitals re-signed defender John Carlson to an 8-year, $64 million deal. How important was this for Washington?
I saw it coming. John Carlson's their best defender they have. He's been in the league forever. The only concern that I have with that John Carlson signing is what are they going to do with Ovechkin and Backstrom? That they do have a bunch of cap space now with losing Barry Trotz and their coach, and they did sign their in-house, their interim. They brought their assistant coach up to their head coach. But the fact that John Carlson signed a $64 million deal for 8 years, that's insane for a defender. He deserves it. He needs to get paid. But what do you think, Tyson, that it's going to do for Backstrom and Ovechkin in that Capitals organization?
Well, I think you hit it. That's a lot of money, especially for a defenseman. 8 years, $64 million. That's a lot of money. I think it very much depletes what they had left in the bank. So when those guys come up for an extension or a new deal, it very much limits their money in that. Now, John Carlson is a good defender, but he's a little bit older, so I think 8 years might have been a little bit much.
It's safe to say he's definitely going to retire after this 8-year contract.
But he had good production for a defenseman. I understand why they paid him. I just think they might have done it for a little too long or a little too much, especially to sign Ovechkin and some of those other guys that are going to need some contracts coming up here soon.
One guy that they got to worry about is Tom Wilson. Tom Wilson, the goon, the enforcer.
Yep.
I love watching him wreck people on the ice. He's the best enforcer that the NHL has right now. You could throw Corey Perry in there, but, I mean, he doesn't really do much out there in Anaheim as it comes to enforcing. Tom Wilson is not afraid to put his body on the line, and when that dude is in a little bit of extracurricular activity and it doesn't mean that they're going to drop gloves, that guy will throw hands, and he does it effectively. He packs a punch, But Tom Wilson's somebody that they got to keep to protect, some of these guys. In the NHL, there's 2 or 3 guys on the ice that are there to protect one player. And Tom Wilson's out there to protect Ovechkin and Backstrom, and I love Tom Wilson watching him play.
I know that you sent me that compilation of him. Let's just be honest, kicking other people's ass on the ice. Yeah. I mean, that's what it was. If you haven't seen a compilation of him on YouTube, I highly suggest watching it because it's very entertaining. One thing though, before we move on to the last signing we're going to talk about. We know that they re-signed their best defender, but they lost their coach,
Barry Trotz,
and
who coincidentally went to the Islanders.
Right, and now that Trotz is gone, what are the chances of the Capitals not only making it back but ultimately winning the Cup?
Slim to none. They're not going back.
Once again, coach is a big deal,
especially in the NHL.
Yeah. But they've still got
huge deal.
They've got that core group of guys that just won it. They haven't really lost anybody. They haven't really gained anybody. I think they've got a really good shot at going back if they can pull off the same kind of magic and beat the Penguins and beat Tampa Bay and
the Maple Leafs
and beat the Maple Leafs, beat those other really good teams in the Eastern Conference. If they can show me that throughout the regular season, I'll stand by them all the way. I think they've got a good shot at going again. Maybe not winning, but definitely going.
I just don't see them beating Pittsburgh or Boston or the Flyers for that matter.
We said that this year too.
Yeah, true. And we also said that whoever beat Pittsburgh was going to win the Cup. Yep. We called that way before the Stanley Cup Finals even started.
And that ended up coming
true.
So there it is. Last one we want to talk about, though. The St. Louis Blues signed David Perron for a 4-year extension for the 3rd time after playing his last season in Vegas due to the expansion draft.
I hate the St. Louis Blues, just like I hate the St. Louis Cardinals. But David Perron coming home, that means a lot to the St. Louis organization. That city absolutely loves that guy. This is his 3rd 4-year extension or 4-year deal that he's signed with the Blues. He pairs very well with Tarasenko and Tarasenko. I don't know why. Quentin Tarasenko is a good offender, good scorer. Darren Perron, he just pairs very well with them guys in St. Louis. I'm glad he's home. Congrats to him. Even congrats on his Stanley Cup run too. I mean, he had the opportunity, but hopefully now St. Louis can get a Stanley Cup run in them. Besides getting, having amazing seasons and getting knocked out in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, good job for him out in Vegas, helping put together that run they made. I'm glad to see him back in St. Louis so we can see the Blackhawks beat him up a couple more times.
Go Hawks!
Hey, they still brought the Knights still brought home that conference trophy. So I mean, that's something that he can take back.
He contributed to that a lot as well.
Absolutely. So that's something he can take back to the Blues, and
the Blues already have a winning mentality, and they prove that because they've had plus seasons over the last 5 or 6. So David Perron coming back with that core group of guys that the Blues have just does nothing but add potential to the Central Conference in the West. But we still got to remember, we have the Hawks. I'm a Hawks fan. Tyson's a Hawks fan. And at the same time, they still have Nashville. Nashville's going to pose problems for everybody. They have the last 3 seasons. Nashville's turned into such a big hockey town, it isn't even funny.
And I want to say one thing. I mean, I'm a Leafs fan, but being in Illinois, being close to Chicago, I am a Hawks fan. I remember when they won those 3 cups. I was there for the last one because I finally started to get into hockey, and that was probably the most excited Chicago's been since the Bears were in the Super Bowl in 2006.
For sure.
So, I definitely am looking forward to them improving, and I don't expect them to do it this year, but I think next year they could be looking at definitely making the playoffs. Would you say that that's out of reach?
Hopefully. But I feel like they're almost in a rebuild mode now.
Yeah, they're they're flipping the button for sure.
Yeah.
With getting or being in a rebuild, it's going to be kind of hard for them to get to the playoffs. But rebuilds in hockey are a lot quicker than they are in the NBA or the MLB.
Right.
They do happen a lot faster.